So the UN, with the help of Europe, has betrayed the security of this world. Hezbollah shoots at IDF soldiers and gets bombed. Stay tuned, there's more. Everything that happens in the Middle East has a huge impact on the entire world. Yes, your world too. So if you want to get the real news from the Middle East and Israel, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Every click will bring peace. I want to jump straight to the latest news from Israel. Today, a Jewish man was stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist in Petah Tikva, which is a city in central Israel. The terrorist pulled a knife and stabbed several times Rabbi Shayo Hayun, a father of 4 children, and left him to die. What kind of human being does that to an innocent civilian? The Palestinian terrorist had a legal work permit in Israel, meaning that he could enter Israel for work, just like tens of thousands of other Palestinians that are doing this every single day. He abused this permit to murder a rabbi whose crime is simply being a Jew living in Israel. I think that the one solution to such terrorists is the death penalty. Why? Because in any other case, this terrorist would find himself in an Israeli prison where he gets bad food. Terrorists can even get a degree. But the worst part is that while sitting in prison, they and their family get a monthly salary from the Palestinian Authority. Every year, the Palestinian Authority is increasing the budget that is used to pay terrorists and their families. This is outrageous. They encourage Palestinians to murder Israelis by offering money in exchange for that. What's even more shameful is that countries in Europe like Sweden and the Netherlands continue to sponsor Palestinian organizations whose connection to terrorists has been already proven. Would you be okay if your tax money is used to pay terrorists? This is insane. Last night, for the first time since 2006, the IDF struck Hezbollah targets inside of Lebanon. I have seen people on social media already sharing lies and misinforming people about this incident. They are saying that Israel has violated Lebanon's sovereignty and that it's shameful, especially after the Beirut blast and more. So let me give you the facts. Last night, an IDF intelligence unit was operating in a community in Israel near the border with Lebanon. Hezbollah snipers in Lebanon fired at them with the aim of killing them, but they missed the target. Now, how do you think the US would respond if shots were fired at its troops from a sovereign country? In response to that, Israeli Air Force struck several Hezbollah observation posts along the border with Israel. Every normal country would have responded in the same way, because if terrorists would target you, would you sit back or stand up and fight back? In the Middle East, only the strong survives, and only with the strong you make peace, not with the weak one. Israel actually just revealed that Hezbollah was firing in between 2 UN posts near the border. It only shows you how weak and useless the UNIFIL is. Just for you to get an understanding, the UNIFIL forces along the border with Israel and Lebanon are not allowed to enter private land in order to investigate cases or inspect whether there are violations of the 1701 resolutions and any terror activities in the region. Hezbollah, like many other terrorist organizations, is taking advantage of that and purposely using private homes and private lands from which they fire at Israel, store rockets, ammunition, and more. So, with their hands tied behind their backs, the UN cannot stop Hezbollah at all. When I served in the military along the border with Lebanon, I saw with my own eyes how Hezbollah was violating Resolution 1701, hiding in homes and preparing for war with Israel. The UN seemed to prefer to turn a blind eye to this instead of taking action. They are afraid of Hezbollah, so they run whenever Hezbollah attacks. Now, the situation in Lebanon is just horrible. Horrible. Not only that Lebanon suffers from an economic crisis, it suffers from a national crisis, especially after the Beirut blast that happened not a long time ago. And I still believe that Hezbollah is responsible for that, and that the material that exploded was meant to be used on Israel at some point. People in Lebanon know that too. That's why they openly speak against Hezbollah. That's why they publicly protest and want Iranian influence out of Lebanon. Because as you know, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy in Lebanon. It is used by the Islamic regime in Iran merely to attack Israel, even at the cost of Lebanese lives. Iran doesn't share a border with Israel. That's why they are basing themselves in Syria and Lebanon that do share a border with Israel. Because Iran wants Israel destroyed. Well, that's not gonna happen. Too bad for them, Israel is not going to be silent and sit back like many European leaders are doing. The last thing that I want to mention is the disgusting UN Security Council. In case you didn't know, not only that they refused to resume the arms embargo on Iran that expires in October 18, and it means that Iran, that causes just about 90% of terrorism in the Middle East, is going to be able to sell and purchase deadly weapons, which we all know are not going to be used for peaceful reasons. So not only that, but they now rejected the US demand to snap back the sanctions on Iran. Why did European leaders refuse to vote in favor on sanctioning Iran? Why did they fear voting in favor of putting an arms embargo on Iran? Isn't that the right thing to do? Isn't it the right thing to do? Europe needs strong leaders who are not afraid to stand up to the tyrants in Tehran. Europe needs leaders who are not politically correct, but all about leading and making the right decisions. European leaders are sleeping. Listen, when you see Israelis, Arabs, and Iranian people all united together against the Islamic regime in Iran, that's when you know who is the problem. We have never seen this before, that Israelis, Arabs, and Iranians agree on something. So how come Europe doesn't agree with us? Do they know better than the locals themselves? They need to understand that when they don't take action, they are in fact taking the side of the terrorist. Haven't we learned anything from history? That when countries are indifferent and silent, horrible things are happening? This is their chance to prove themselves. Iran openly calls for the destruction of Israel. Is that not enough for world leaders to take action? What are they waiting for? For Iran to achieve a nuclear bomb and destroy Israel? Will they wake up only then? It will be too late. Israel is what stands between the world, between you, and terrorism. When countries vote against Israel at the UN, they basically vote against themselves. Because Israel is making this world a lot safer when it fights terrorism. Israel's haters hate the fact that the Arab world is making peace with us. They hate it because they hate peace. Because in a future peaceful Middle East, terrorists are just part of the past. That's why Iran condemns the peace agreement, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian Authority. And it all comes back to Iran. Iran is the #1 sponsor of terrorism all across the Middle East. It must be stopped before it is too late. Our world needs strong leaders. There's definitely no time to waste on weak ones. I will see you next week.